Imagine burying your pregnant wife, only to have a 6-year-old girl walk up to you and say her mother has your exact custom Mafia ring. For 6 years, the Winter King of Boston's underworld thought his family was dead. He didn't know his wife had survived an assassination attempt and faked her death to protect their child from a traitor inside his inner circle. This is the chilling story of a ghost wife's revenge and the hotel lobby encounter that brought a criminal empire to its knees. Picture the opening frame with me, as if we are slowly panning across a movie set. A little girl, barely 6 years old, wanders through the hushed expanse of the Beaumont Hotel lobby. The camera catches the warm gleam of brass and the muffled silence of impossibly thick carpets, completely shutting out the bitter Boston wind. At the polished mahogany bar sits Dominic. His glass of whiskey rests untouched in front of him. We zoom in on his posture, stiff and commanding. He refuses to drink because he demands absolute mastery over every shadow in the room. But here is a quiet truth we all must face. The deepest tragedies of our lives rarely strike when everything is falling apart. They hit exactly when we believe we have forced the world into perfect obedience. The camera pulls back to reveal his associates, casually discussing the purchase of a 12-property hotel empire right in the open. It is a brilliant bit of staging, acting as if they have nothing to hide. Dominic is 37, his expression carved from stone. But the true focus of our lens lands on his right hand. A heavy platinum ring catches the dim light, set with 7 black diamonds. The only matching piece was buried 6 years ago in an empty wooden box, a heavy symbol of a man frozen in his own grief. Then, a shift in the blocking. The small girl in the oversized coat steps into his light, holding a torn stuffed animal. It is a painful reminder for anyone watching. Unresolved pain never truly stays buried. It will always find a quiet moment to tap you on the shoulder. We move to an extreme close-up. The little girl stares directly at the dark stones on his hand. The background noise drops out as 8 armed guards shift their weight, their coats rustling, ready to draw weapons on a ghost. But the child does not flinch. She looks up at this terrifying man and says, in a voice like breaking glass, that her mother has the exact same ring. The physical reaction is immediate. Dominic, a man who has ordered executions without his pulse rising a single beat, stops breathing. The blood drains completely from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse under the amber bar lights. It shows us something so fragile about being human. You can build the thickest walls imaginable around your heart, but one tiny echo from the past can bring the entire fortress crashing down. Let us slow the scene down to a painful crawl. Dominic stares at the child, his eyes locking onto a tiny dark mole softly resting on her left cheek. You can see the muscles in his jaw trembling, locked in absolute paralysis. Just then, a frantic woman in a gray knit cap rushes into the frame, pulling the little girl back. As she pulls the child close, the woman looks up. Our cameras catch the exact second their eyes finally meet. It is a total, shattering collapse of reality. Dominic is looking into the living, breathing face of the woman he thought he buried 6 years ago. The ambient music fades into a ringing silence. It is a beautiful, terrible lesson in carrying secrets. The past is nothing but a heavy debt. And sooner or later, life will always come around to collect what is truly owed. To really feel the weight of this tragedy, follow me back in time to where the wound first opened. The scene cuts to a bitter night 6 years ago. It is March 14th, 10:40 at night, on a black, icy highway in Providence. Rain lashes against the windshield. Inside the car sits Claire. She is 22, 5 months pregnant and suffocating inside a dark, controlling marriage. But tonight, there is a glimmer of light. Just hours ago, she held a sonogram proving she was having a little girl. She drives with one hand softly resting on that grainy printout, treating it like a life raft. It is one of the most painful ironies of the human heart. We are almost always the most defenseless against sudden destruction, right in the very moment we finally dare to feel a spark of pure joy. The dashboard casts a weak blue glow on her face as she calls Dominic, miles away in a high-rise in Manhattan for once. Her voice shakes with genuine excitement as she tells him they are having a daughter. Through the phone speaker, we hear something incredibly rare. Dominic actually laughs. He promises to be home by midnight, but the script flips without warning. Heavy hail suddenly beats against the metal roof like gunfire. Out of the darkness, a massive black sedan matches her speed. With a sickening crunch of metal, it violently rams her car through the guardrail, sending her plummeting into the freezing black river below. It is a chilling reminder for all of us, no matter how perfectly we plan our tomorrows. A single brutal act can rip the pen right out of our hands in a heartbeat. The camera plunges underwater. The shallow riverbed and her strict habit of wearing a seatbelt keep her from dying on impact. The sheer, biting cold of the icy water shocks her lungs, forcing her eyes wide open. Up on the muddy bank, a savior appears. Elena, an off-duty nurse, scrambles down the slope, dragging Claire out of the sinking wreckage. But instead of crying for help, Claire does something terrifying. Trembling and soaked in blood, she grips the nurse firmly by the wrist. Her eyes are entirely feral as she begs the woman to stop saving her. It is a haunting reality of domestic survival, when you suddenly realize the monster trying to kill you sleeps in your own bed. Playing dead becomes the only script that will actually keep you breathing. Focus on the tension in this muddy, freezing frame. A woman bleeding out is fighting against her own rescue. Elena has worked in emergency rooms for 15 years. She knows what blind panic looks like, but in Claire's wide, desperate eyes, she sees only pure, calculated terror. With freezing fingers, Claire pulls that heavy platinum ring off her hand. She presses it into the nurse's palm with a simple, chilling demand. If she dies, give it to Dominic. If she lives, tell no one. Elena smuggles her away into the night, and by morning, the local news is running the tragic story of a wife lost to the river. It teaches us a grim truth about the world. Sometimes the very arms that swear to hold and protect you are the exact cages you have to break your own bones to escape. The screen fades from the dark river to a rainy cemetery. We watch a purely theatrical funeral built around an empty wooden box miles away. In a dim motel room, Claire sits on a cheap mattress, watching her own burial on a small television. Her hands rest quietly on her growing stomach. The camera lingers on her face, completely blank, not a single tear falls. She knows the truth now. Only her husband and 3 close friends knew her route that night. The betrayal is absolute. To break the chains of this deeply toxic love, she has to kill the girl she used to be. She trades her name for Grace Bennett and disappears into the static. It is a brutal but necessary lesson. Sometimes, the only way to actually survive the fire is to become the ashes and let the wind blow your old self away. Fast forward 4 months. The lighting warms slightly as Grace holds a newborn baby girl to her chest. She names the child Lily. It is a tragic detail, a lingering echo of her broken heart, even as she runs from a man she fears. She names their daughter after the only flower he ever loved. The timeline shifts, jumping 6 years ahead. We find Dominic standing alone in a massive cold glass office high above Boston. He looks like a king who has conquered the entire world, yet completely lost his own soul. His posture is rigid, his eyes hollow. It points to a heavy, unavoidable fact of life. You can build the most secure, towering castle out of money and power, but it will never have walls thick enough to keep out the ghosts that sleep inside your own head. Now listen closely to the whispers among his men. They do not use his real name anymore. They call him the Winter King. Dominic accepts the dark title because it fits perfectly. He has survived the death of his wife by simply turning off his own humanity. The camera studies his face, carved in permanent, unfeeling lines yet for 6 long years. He has poured millions of dollars into private investigators, obsessively tracking down every single piece of metal from that crash. He is a man driven mad by the need for control. It brings a deeply human struggle into focus. True, devastating heartbreak never simply fades away with time. We just build thicker, heavier layers of armor, hoping the iron will somehow hold our shattered pieces together. Walk with me through this final, agonizing twist of his obsession. Dominic literally purchased the entire junkyard just to keep the rusted shell of her car locked away. While the police wrote it off as a tragic slip on the ice, he paid a fortune for a private engineer to cut the wreck apart. The final report was a hammer blow. The brake lines were sliced with surgical precision. It was not an accident. It was an execution. They handed him back nothing but her ruined shoe, a soaked handbag, and a terrifying truth. He had been betrayed. And this leaves us with a painful final thought. The worst kind of torment is not wondering if you were wronged. It is knowing you were stabbed in the back, but having absolutely no idea whose throat to rip out in return. Let us open the file together. Today, you and I are going to step directly into the cold pathology of a kingpin. The mahogany coffin they lowered into the earth 6 years ago held absolutely nothing. Standing beside Dominic in that cemetery was Ray Castellano, the one confidant who held the keys to his broken mind. That night, Ray poured amber whiskey into a crystal glass, gently urging his boss to let the dead rest, paralyzed by grief. Dominic simply nodded. Now he sits in a dimly lit office, staring at corporate documents meant to wash his capital. It teaches us a brutal truth about survival. We spend our lives building towering iron fortresses to keep out our sworn enemies, completely blind to the fact that the most fatal poison is almost always handed to us by the friend pouring our drinks. Examine the framing of this scene. It is high noon, dead center in the cavernous Beaumont lobby. Watch how the shadows fall to see who truly controls the room. Ray selected the venue and set the tempo. Dominic merely breathes, displaying the passivity of a man hollowed out by loss. Focus the lens on his right hand resting against the desk. A platinum wedding band catches a thin slice of afternoon light. His thumb rotates it over and over. 6 years of tracing the exact same metal circle. The bitter truth about profound sorrow is that it bypasses the mind entirely, sinking deep into your bones as pure muscle memory. When Marcus Webb pushes through the doors with the Wednesday wire notes, shoving reading glasses into his graying hair, Dominic does not even blink. The physical world no longer moves him. Marcus has known Dominic for 25 years. He instantly recognizes the glassy stare of a man entirely untethered from reality. When he asks if Nico is recovering, Dominic simply turns his head. He stares out the window at the Boston harbor, washed in a harsh afternoon sun, and mutters that some wounds never close. Time does not actually heal our deepest psychological fractures. It merely forces your spine to grow thick enough to carry the unbearable weight. Marcus quietly steps back, leaving his friend alone with the spinning ring. But the camera cuts abruptly 35 miles south to Providence. A little girl presses hard on a yellow pencil, tracing stars on a notepad. Beside her walks a woman the entire world mourned 6 years ago. The neighbors just call her Grace Bennett. Observe how she survives the cold. She blends into the background as a clerk at the Providence Public Library. A short walk from a tiny apartment where the winter radiator screams all night. Her little girl innocently gives names to the maple trees outside. It looks like a painting of domestic peace, but that warmth is a pure illusion. The library badge against her chest is a master key. Unlocking court dockets and property filings, survival in the dark dictates a brutal discipline. True phantoms never leave a digital footprint. Every week she drives 40 frozen minutes across the state line. She sits under flickering fluorescent lights, typing untraceable aliases into public computers. It reminds us that a quiet life is often built on a foundation of desperate paranoia. She is executing a flawless campaign in the shadows. Focus the camera on her weapon. It is shockingly analog. A worn brown leather notebook. When her daughter points at it, she gives a gentle maternal smile, whispering that it is just a boring grocery list. But beneath that soft facade lies a cold, meticulously coded execution ledger. 47 targets. She has spent 6 years reconstructing the entire Moretti architecture from the ashes. The irony of fate is always poetic. The woman they tried to erase is now the ghost dismantling their empire. Her raw intel flows from Harold Finch, an aging journalist confined to an armchair by a failing heart. She reached out through encrypted channels, wearing the mask of an innocent student researching the docs. We survive our deepest trauma by becoming whatever the dark requires of us. She is transformed into a perfect chameleon of grief. For 2 years, Harold quietly feeds her the data his corporate publishers were too terrified to print. This is how she runs her finger across the authentic police accident report. This is how she tracks the phantom black sedan that rammed her off the frozen highway. Stripped plates and dummy corporations slowly unravel, pointing a bloody arrow to the Bianchi family. Of course, it was them. Yet, the one jagged variable keeping her awake at dawn is the rat. Someone inside Dominic's trusted inner circle handed the Bianchis her exact coordinates. The hardest lesson of human nature is written right here. The knife that finally drops you never comes from a stranger. It is always held by someone sitting at your own dinner table. So, she processes her trauma through quiet, methodical action, hunting the dead before casually packing her daughter's lunchbox. As the shadows stretch, she walks to the school to retrieve a daughter so sharply analytical the teachers joke she is a miniature lawyer. The evening is regulated by boiling cheap pasta and singing Lily to sleep as she clutches a battered stuffed cat named Captain. Only when the apartment falls into absolute silence does the leather notebook resurface. The true tragedy here is the innocent child. Lily looks at a blurry photograph and genuinely believes her father is a hero, a beautiful distortion Claire built by hand. Children possess a fierce, instinctive mercy. They almost never tear down the fragile walls, holding their broken parents together. And speaking of hidden things, tucked away in the deepest corner of her closet, buried under heavy winter coats, sits a small wooden box. Inside rests a heavy platinum band set with 7 sharp black diamonds. She custom ordered that specific piece for Dominic during their engagement, meant to mirror her own ring. But on the frozen morning, the hitman came for her. The swelling of late pregnancy forced her to leave it resting on the bedroom dresser. The ring they eventually buried with a substitute corpse was nothing but a cheap decoy for 6 long years. The authentic band has rested in the pitch black, waiting for a spark. Yesterday, probability finally delivered the match. Sitting alone in the break room, Claire flips through the business section of a Boston newspaper. The camera slowly pushes in on a photograph from a philanthropic gala. Dominic stands dead center, wearing the vacant, hollow stare of a clinically depressed ghost, but hovering exactly half a step behind his right shoulder, perfectly in focus, is his senior counsel, Ray Castellano. She stares at the ink until the newsprint warps. The man in the photo shows the creep of time. The jawline is thicker, the hairline receding. But the eyes are identical. They are the exact remorseless eyes she locked onto through a violently collapsing windshield in the freezing rain. The trauma response is so sudden, she barely makes it to the restroom before her stomach violently purges. It reminds us that life frequently delivers its most agonizing truths when we least expect them. Before nightfall, she secures a room in Cambridge and 2 morning rail tickets. She gently tells her daughter they are taking a birthday trip. Lily falls asleep flooded with joy, while Claire stays awake in the dark, her fingers obsessively tracing the cold diamond hardware. And this is exactly where her controlled reality begins to unravel. Stick with me here, because you and I have observed this tragic pattern before. The dangerous illusion of the perfect operation. Phase 1. Infiltrate the perimeter early. Phase 2. Visually verify the betrayer from a secure distance. Phase 3. Evaporate. She lacks the resources for a confrontation today. She merely requires cold verification. She stations her daughter at a circular table, providing apple juice, a pastry, and a distraction. The damaged stuffed cat is positioned as a psychological anchor. Claire kneels down, issuing a strict maternal directive to remain completely stationary. She tasks the child with counting pedestrians wearing red scarves, a basic cognitive diversion. Lily nods, entirely oblivious to the heavy threat in the room. Claire exhales a slow breath, pivots on her heel, and boldly approaches the marble elevator bank. Her execution is clinically precise. She avoids a direct breach. Instead, she navigates the corridor, projecting the innocent body language of a disoriented tourist searching for a symposium. She glides past the heavy brass signage displaying the Moretti name. Through a partial opening in the door, the target is acquired. Ray occupies the dominant position at the table. Bizarrely, he wears black leather gloves indoors. It is a classic psychological shield for a man terrified of leaving his mark on the world. The ocular identification is a perfect match. Before his nervous system can even sense her, she executes a smooth retreat to the elevator. Flawless reconnaissance, however. Down in the civilian lobby, the brutal law of chaos theory asserts itself. Lily counts 43 red garments before a stranger walking a playful terrier completely shatters her focus. The stuffed cat slips from the chair, prompting the child to dive beneath the table. We often call this the catastrophic intersection of variables. When the little girl resurfaces, a male figure is traversing her visual field. Catching the ambient light on his right hand is a thick platinum band featuring 7 black diamonds. It is an identical match to the object she secretly examined in her mother's hidden box. Driven by innocent curiosity, she quietly shadows his footsteps. Dominic assumes a posture at the bar, requesting water with a single olive. Elevating the glass is a prearranged micro-expression to notify his armed security that the perimeter is stable. Suddenly, he registers a faint, tugging pressure on his elbow. He slowly lowers his grieving gaze to find a tiny 6-year-old in a navy coat, staring right up at him while clutching a mutilated toy. Let the camera slowly push in. Focus on the contrast, the massive stone-faced syndicate boss, and the tiny girl staring at his glass. The room spins. Completely unaware of the tectonic shift happening in this man's chest, he halts his lethal bodyguards with a single trembling twitch of a finger. He might be a monster to the world, but not to her. She mentions her mother's jewelry, and the camera captures the absolute plunge in his pulse. He pulls the name from his tightening throat. Grace, we often forget that the hardest hearts are the most fragile when struck at the right angle. The little girl simply asks for the green olive, totally oblivious to the ghost she just summoned. Watch the extreme close-up on his eyes. Dominic traces the dark, familiar curve of her jaw, the hauntingly identical mole on her soft cheek. He hands her the olive, his hand unusually slow, then the auditory strike. A woman's voice cuts through the ambient clatter of the lobby, like a rusted blade. Notice how the ambient lighting suddenly feels violently cold. Every survival instinct screams at him to stare straight ahead, to protect the empire of ash he built over 6 long years. But love is a fatal gravitational pull. He turns there, bathed in the muted lobby light. Stands a woman paralyzed in pure, breathless horror. Here is a truth we all eventually face. You can bury your past deep in the earth, but the ghosts we love will always dig their way out. Let us freeze the frame right here, you and I, and truly look at this tragedy. 6 agonizing years of mourning, entirely shattered in a 2-second gaze. Dominic half rises, terrified that if he breathes, this beautiful ghost will turn to mist. But watch the background. The brass elevator doors slide open, and Ray steps into the frame. The camera shifts focus to the enforcer's face. A man who murders without a flinch suddenly goes chalk white, the blood completely draining from his rigid jaw, from across the polished floor. Claire catches that exact look of panic. Life is funny like that, isn't it? The truth you spend a lifetime hiding will always break down your door when you are least prepared for it. She snatches the little girl's hand and shrinks into the shadows. She leans across the invisible boundary, her voice trembling like a dying bird. She begs him, if he ever truly loved her, do not follow, and do not trust the man behind him. In a blur of motion, she dissolves through the heavy glass doors, swallowed completely by the gray city traffic. The camera lingers on Dominic at the mahogany bar. His hand is frozen to his glass, knuckles white, trapped in a breathless void. It is a cruel irony that finally holding the one thing you prayed for can break your soul faster than losing it. His loyal Lieutenant Marcus runs up, panic in his voice, but Dominic cannot form a single word. Then stepping right into the foreground, Ray appears. The traitor casually adjusts his cuff, wearing the mask of a loyal brother without a single flaw. Pay attention to the audio track. Ray's voice is perfectly smooth, devoid of even a micro-tremor. The camera pans slowly behind Dominic's shoulder as he turns to look at the man who stood by his side at his wife's empty grave. He scans the sharp suit, the dark gloves, searching for a crack, and there it is, a single damning drop of sweat sliding down Ray's temple. Claire's desperate warning echoes over the scene. Dominic's face goes completely dead. He buries the screaming agony in his chest, softly telling Ray to head upstairs. It is a harsh reality of this world. The blade that cuts the deepest is never held by an enemy, but by the friend standing right beside you. Dominic waits until the elevator closes, walks mechanically into the restroom, and falls to the cold tiles. Look at the violent shaking in his hands against the porcelain sink. He has not broken down like this since the police handed him her ruined, blood-soaked dress all those years ago. He stares at his own hollow eyes in the mirror, fighting for a single breath. The tragic math adds up in his head. The little girl had his exact eyes, and her mother's gentle smile. This is no hallucination. The woman he loves is alive, but she chose to let him drown in grief. Why? Because the architect of her nightmare is his right-hand man. Sometimes the heaviest burden we carry is the truth we have to figure out all by ourselves. She stayed legally dead, because staying dead was the only way to keep their daughter safe from the monster Dominic brought into their own home. Stick with me here, because this is where the Greek tragedy truly begins. He splashes freezing water on his face, and in 4 short minutes, the grieving husband dies, and the ruthless king returns. The camera tracks him entering the massive glass boardroom, dominating the space. The suits drone on about numbers, completely blind to the silent, deadly game playing out right in front of them. It is terrifying how easily a room full of people can miss a war being fought in plain sight. The air conditioning is blasting, yet Ray is visibly suffocating in his expensive collar. Dominic watches from the corner of his eye as the enforcer furiously rubs his wrist. A nervous tick of a guilty man. A tick Dominic never noticed because he never thought to look. Focus on the tension stretching until it snaps. Looking down at the heavy paper, Ray stumbles. He stutters out a $4.2 million figure. A glaring mistake that a trembling junior clerk has to awkwardly correct. In over a decade of blood and money, this stone-cold killer has never fumbled a single syllable. Dominic smiles, a warm, terrifyingly hollow smile, signing the pages with absolute robotic calm. But the second the heavy oak doors close behind them in the hallway, the illusion shatters. He yanks Marcus into the shadows, his voice a lethal whisper. He demands every scrap of data on Ray pulled from the shadows. Financials, movements, everything. When the foundation of your house is built on a lie, the walls are just waiting to crush you. Marcus visibly recoils against the wall, reading the absolute murder in his boss's cold stare. Dominic looks down the empty hall and whispers that he finally found the man who dug his wife's grave. Cut to the pitch black of his massive, empty mansion later that night. The sole source of light is a single harsh bulb casting long shadows. He pulls a scratched wooden box from a hidden wall safe, a box he has not dared to touch in years. Inside sits a faded photograph and a piece of stained paper. He slides down the wall, chest heaving. It is the cruelest joke of human nature. The pain of losing someone never actually shrinks. We just build thicker armor around it to survive the day. He traces the familiar letters on the paper, the tragedy tearing him apart from the inside. Sprawled on the expensive hardwood, the crime lord begins to laugh. Not a laugh of relief, but a broken, ragged sound of a man realizing his entire tragic downfall was a directed play. The camera sweeps out. Flying across the dark river to a much grimmer scene, we find Claire shivering violently in a filthy, rain-soaked alley. Her evasion is a masterpiece of desperation. She fed false directions to the cab, traded paper cash, and vanished into the city's underbelly. We can learn a lot from a mother's terror. When everything you love is on the line, pure paranoia is the only thing that keeps your heart beating. She pays for a rotting room, using the name Grace Bennett, completely erasing her existence from the world. A ghost hiding from the devil she used to sleep beside. Let's step into this decaying room together and feel the walls closing in. It is a concrete box, far beneath the notice of the men hunting her. The second the heavy wooden door shuts, she throws 3 rusted deadbolts and pulls the ragged curtains shut. Only a single, flickering yellow light remains. Standing in the gloom, her tiny daughter hugs a stuffed bear and begs to go back to their bright, warm house. This is the true, unspoken agony of the run, explaining the darkness of the world to a child who only knows the light. Claire drops slowly to her knees, gripping her little girl's shoulders. She looks directly into those innocent, frightened eyes and whispers a tearful, absolute command to stay quiet, and the little girl just nods. Picture the scene, you and I watching from the shadows of this dimly lit room. Claire kneels, gripping her daughter's narrow shoulders, her voice a fragile whisper promising they can never return. Then the little girl shatters their universe, asking if they are running because of the man with the matching wedding ring. The camera slowly pushes in on Claire's face. Total respiratory failure. She had buried the lobby encounter, yet Lily perfectly recites every detail. The heavy gold jewelry, the cocktail olive, the armed guards. It reminds us of a hard truth. You can build a perfect lie for a decade, but it only takes one honest, innocent moment to tear it all down. Claire closes her eyes. Dominic will know. Let the lens linger on the agonizing gap between mother and child. Claire forces herself to explain the unspeakable. She tells Lily that the man at the bar is a ghost from the past, but a very real predator is hunting them now. Silence is their only armor. We watch grown men shatter under this kind of absolute terror, but little Lily processes the nightmare with a chilling, hollow calm. She simply asks if the safe man knows the monster is here. Claire powers on a cheap, untraceable phone. There is a quiet lesson here for all of us. Children are built for survival, and they often read the dark, unspoken truths of the world far better than the adults who try to hide them. The final countdown is ticking. We stay tight on Claire's trembling fingers as she dials the single number saved in the plastic phone. When Elena answers, the silence hangs heavy. There is no greeting, only raw desperation. The predator saw them. The child must be hidden. Elena's immediate choice to drive 2 hours into the dead of night offers a profound, heartbreaking realization. When absolute disaster strikes, extreme trauma will isolate you from the world, and only blind, unquestioning loyalty can reach across the dark to save you. Claire drops the phone and grabs a pen, tearing into hotel paper. Meet me at Tad-Eye on Charles Street. Come alone, if you still love me. Do not tell Ray, the trap is officially set. We follow the tragic chain of motion. A neighborhood boy clutches a $40 bill, his small hand sliding a white envelope beneath the heavy door of a Beacon Hill townhouse. 2 hours pass in silence then. Dominic Moretti steps into his grand, shadowed foyer. His dark eyes drop to the rug. He recognizes the slant of that handwriting instantly. Before his fingers even touch the paper, a violent physical shock ripples through his muscles, mirroring the exact moment he was told his wife was dead, 6 years ago. It teaches us a brutal reality about the human heart. You can never truly bury your deepest grief, because unresolved trauma will always wait in the shadows to strike you down again. The camera circles Dominic in the heavy gloom of his study. He traces the 4 sentences endlessly, completely paralyzed. A broken king chained to his desk by a ghost. Now let us cross the dark river to a sterile Cambridge hotel room. Claire presses her palm against the freezing glass of the window, whispering into the night, begging her husband for the strength to finish this terrible journey. Even the strongest survivors eventually realize they cannot carry the weight of the world completely alone, but the tragedy sharpens as we cut away. 30 stories above the glowing city, Ray stares into a towering mirror inside his sprawling penthouse. A lavish gift Dominic bought him to reward a total lie. You and I have to look closely at the twisted poetry of this betrayal. Dominic practically handed the keys to his kingdom to Ray, delivering a tearful speech about brotherhood that Ray later weaponized at family funerals. In the quiet luxury of the bathroom, Ray unbuttons his silk shirt. The harsh light exposes a brutal, jagged white scar tearing across his ribs. It was stitched by a terrified meat packer in 1996. The night Dominic's ruthless father ordered the total eradication of Ray's bloodline, 6 gunmen turned a family dinner into a slaughterhouse. It leaves us with a chilling reflection. The deepest, unhealed wounds have the power to turn innocent victims into the very monsters they hate. Listen to the phantom sounds echoing in Ray's mind. A young boy trapped inside a freezing walk-in cooler, forced to hear the systematic slaughter of his father and uncles just inches away. He absorbs the total death of his family. He survives by lying in a wooden crate, his own blood mixing with animal blood under a heavy tarp. A butcher stitches him together. Trapping the horror deep inside his chest that night, Raymond Falcone died. He drove into the Bronx, purchased a fake social security number, and erased his own soul to become Castellano. It is a grim reminder for us all, when you bury your pain instead of facing it, that suffering does not fade away. It simply mutates into something entirely lethal. The sheer patience of this monster is almost romantic in its cruelty. 30 long years of absolute suffering, he travels to Montreal, letting a surgeon carve a new face into his bones, and pays a vocal coach to strip away his childhood accent. 12 years ago, he paints his masterpiece. He pays a gunman to fire at Dominic, intentionally missing. Ray slashes Dominic's arm to induce panic, then steps into the line of fire, taking a bullet to his own shoulder. Dominic weeps over his bleeding savior, bringing the architect of his ruin into his home. It shows us how deeply blinding trust can be. When someone is willing to bleed just to earn your loyalty, they can manipulate your heart into seeing a savior instead of a snake. Consider the absolute breaking point of this tragedy. Ray lives in a constant state of agonizing tension, waiting for the perfect strike. The moment arrives 6 years ago. Dominic leaves a small glossy sonogram sitting on his massive desk. Claire is 5 months pregnant, a little girl. To a sane man, it is a beautiful miracle of life, but through the warped, infected mind of a man whose entire family was butchered, that unborn child is nothing but the enemy's future. It proves how utterly destructive vengeance can be. A heart entirely consumed by hatred will eventually lose the ability to recognize pure innocence. Ray picks up a cheap plastic phone, dials a quiet cleaner named Sal, and sets the nightmare into motion. The violence is sickeningly fast. A mechanic takes a bribe to slice the brake lines, and a hired driver rams Claire's car off the freezing bridge of Interstate 95. Days later, Dominic stands over an empty, polished wooden box, sobbing uncontrollably into the shoulder of the very man who murdered his wife. Ray softly strokes the grieving father's back. Now back in the present, Ray slowly buttons his shirt. He pours a heavy glass of scotch and stares out at the glittering Boston skyline. But he saw Claire breathing in the hotel lobby today, holding the hand of a 6-year-old child. It is a universal truth. No matter how perfectly you construct a reality built on lies and blood, the truth will always survive to tear it down. Focus on the terrifying discipline Claire showed in that lobby. She locked eyes with the man who tried to kill her from 30 feet away. Her expression totally blank, not a single flinch. Ray knows exactly what that means. 6 years of hiding transforms a victim into a hunter. Drowning in sudden, suffocating paranoia, he unlocks a hidden wall safe and pulls out a black phone. He dials Sal, stating the mother fox and her cub are alive. Sal tries to calm the rising storm, arguing they might just be running. But Ray knows if Claire reaches Dominic, the empire burns. Sal whispers the final order to kill. It is a dark reminder. When absolute fear takes control of the mind, survival instincts will quickly justify the ultimate evil. Pull up the roots, Sal tells him, a gentle poetic phrase for the darkest sin imaginable, the murder of a child. Ray hangs up and immediately summons a shadow unit from the city's underbelly. These men do not know Dominic, and they do not care about family honor. Ray feeds them the target details with the cold, dead voice of a machine. A dark-haired woman, a 6-year-old girl clutching a stuffed animal, standing at his glowing terminal. Ray takes complete administrative control of the syndicate's massive surveillance network. He sweeps the city grid. There is a profound tragedy here. The very walls and weapons a family builds to protect their own can easily be turned inward to destroy them if the wrong man holds the keys. Let us look through the lens together as the sociopath believes he has won. The glow of the monitor paints Ray in a sickly light. He types a custom sequence to wipe the digital memory clean, erasing the 13 minutes between 11:43 and 11:56. He slams the laptop shut, though his fingers tremble, but Ray suffers from the fatal arrogance of the narcissist. He has no idea that at 8 in the morning, Dominic triggered an encrypted backup. Ray walks away feeling invisible, blind to the fact that his treachery is forever trapped on film. Hours bleed into 7 the next morning. Ray is exhausted, unaware of his ruin. Meanwhile, Elena heavily climbs the Cambridge Hotel stairs. The lesson we find here is undeniable. The shadows we use to hide our darkest secrets are often the very things that expose us to the unforgiving light. The camera pans to Claire, standing tense behind the heavy door. She throws it open before Elena can even knock. A raw reflex born from years of looking over her shoulder. Elena steps inside and pulls the little girl into a deep hug, but Lily barely reacts. She sits under the dim lamplight, slowly brushing the matted fur of her stuffed animal. It is a heartbreaking defense. Lily quietly looks up and asks if her mother is going to see the man with the matching ring. The question shatters Claire. Her frozen mask cracks, her voice shaking as she finally admits she is returning to the father. Lily just stares, absorbing the massive weight in total silence. The simple life lesson remains true. A child does not merely absorb the pain of a fractured world. They silently build heavy armor out of the sharpest pieces just to survive the day. Watch the pure shock dawn in the little girl's eyes. Her jaw parts, breath-catching as she realizes the father she mourned is actually alive. Claire drops to her knees, pulling her daughter into a crushing embrace. Hiding the tears spilling down her own cheeks, she leans in close. Planting a dangerous seed of hope, she whispers that he is a good man, pleading for trust, and the child slowly nods then. Lily presses her battered stuffed cat into her mother's shaking hands, whispering that it keeps people safe. The innocent gesture leaves Claire completely speechless. Elena swiftly gathers the little girl in her arms, rushing down the back stairs to a waiting black sedan. Within 10 minutes, they vanish into the cold morning. The lesson here cuts deep. A child will always sacrifice their own fragile comfort to heal the broken adults who shattered their reality. Today, you and I are going to unpack the quiet terror of this morning. By sunrise, the child is racing north on Interstate 93. But Claire walks directly back into the mouth of the wolf. At 9:45, she steps into a bright cafe on Charles Street. The warm sunlight catches the marble counters, a sharp contrast to her dark reality. Claire takes a corner seat. Wrapping a heavy scarf around her neck, hiding her daughter's toy in her lap, she ignores her tea, her dark eyes darting toward the glass door with pure panic. At exactly 9:58, the door swings open. Dominic walks in, completely alone. The air in the room seems to stop moving entirely. The lesson is as harsh as the bitter winter wind. You can run to the edges of the earth, but you can never truly outrun the shadows and demons you refuse to finally turn around and face. The camera lingers on Dominic as the ruthless king completely dissolves. He is not wearing his armor, just a simple black wool coat. For a single heartbeat, the dangerous man vanishes, replaced by the young boy who used to walk beside her across the bridge. Seeing her sitting there, his mind flatlines. He freezes in the doorway for 3 agonizing seconds while strangers push past his shoulders, slowly. He moves to the table, and they sit trapped in 20 seconds of thick, suffocating silence. Claire grips her delicate teacup like a weapon. Dominic rests his hands on the table, the pale morning light catching the platinum wedding band he never took off when he tries to say her name. His rough voice completely breaks in half. She softly answers that she is sorry. The lesson is timeless. Even the most violent men will crumble when confronted by the ghosts they loved and lost. Dominic violently shakes his head, desperate to push the nightmare away, but Claire cannot hold it back anymore. The dam breaks, and she unleashes 6 years of suffocating silence. She speaks fast, terrified that if she pauses, she will shatter into pieces. She paints the terrifying picture of the failing brakes, the massive truck bearing down on her, and the freezing river water pulling her under. The heaviest tragedy is the way she erased her own soul just to survive. She speaks of hiding in a dusty room for 4 months, giving birth completely alone, and burning her past to ash. She built a ghost out of 47 stolen names and the quiet help of an old man named Harold. The lesson we must carry with us is brutal. Sometimes, to survive the true monsters hunting you in the dark, you have to completely destroy the innocent person you used to be. The tension in the cafe thickens as she lays out the map of her misery. She traces a fake Delaware company through a mountain of lies, drawing a straight line to the Bianchi family. Then she drops the final devastating weight. She whispers that she saw Ray driving that heavy truck. Dominic turns to stone. The only motion in his entire body is his right hand, heavy with the Orion ring, slowly clenching into a lethal fist. This is where the true tragedy bleeds out. Claire confesses she stayed in the shadows because she did not know whose face was hiding behind the knife. One wrong step meant a grave for their little girl. She spent 6 agonizing years in the dark without the final proof to bury Ray. The tragic lesson is loud and clear. Trust becomes nothing but a fatal illusion when you decide to build your family home inside a cage full of starving wolves. Stick with me, because the way their minds work in this moment is fascinating. Dominic stares across the table, a dangerous muscle ticking in his jaw. The king reclaims his throne, softly promising that he has the power to burn it all down. He speaks of their 6 stolen years, and she replies, her voice hollow, that she counted every single day. But notice the terrifying blind spot they share. While they drown in the emotion of this reunion, a black sedan sits idling across the street. Claire pulls out a worn leather notebook, touching the pages like a sacred relic. She whispers about the truck's license plate, believing she holds the key to their freedom. She is entirely blind to the hidden crosshairs tracking her chest. The lesson here is absolute. The exact second you finally believe you are perfectly safe is always the moment you are the most exposed to the blade. She leans closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper as she lists the vehicle modifications. She details the cold-stamped numbers tying the truck to a Bianchi cousin, but the sickening truth is that no hard evidence points directly to Ray. Dominic slowly nods, his face smoothing into a terrifying mask of sociopathic calm. He quietly delivers the final blow. The brakes were cut on March 12th, just 48 hours after they discovered the pregnancy. She plunged into the freezing water on the 14th. Claire looks up, her breath hitching as the horror finally clicks into place. The assassin had been standing inside the warm walls of their own home. It is a suffocating realization. The life lesson we must draw from this is chilling. The most lethal weapons are rarely held by the enemies waiting at the gates, but by the trusted friends sitting quietly at your dinner table. Let the camera linger on their faces as the reality of the betrayal sets in. Only 4 people in the entire world knew about the child: Dominic, Claire the old doctor, and Ray. Dominic stares into the distance, rewinding the memories. He sees Ray walking into the study during that happy phone call, then backing out into the shadows. Dominic had foolishly thought it was respect, but Claire sees the monster clearly. Ray was never being polite. He was simply waiting in the dark with a knife. They sit together as the sickening truth settles over them. Ray was the parasite, feeding secrets directly to the Bianchi family. Every piece of guidance he gave over 6 years was a slow walk toward the grave. The lesson here should make your blood run cold. Patience is not always a virtue of the wise. Often it is simply the preferred weapon of a hidden predator waiting to strike. You and I are going to watch as grief violently transforms into vengeance. Claire insists they cannot strike blindly, and Dominic slowly nods. His voice drops to a lethal whisper, signaling that the monster inside him is fully awake. He lays out a chilling performance. He will go back to the office, shake hands, and smile at the man who murdered his family. Ray will not see a single tremor of rage, but in the dark, Dominic's soldiers will tear Ray's life apart piece by piece, hunting down 12 years of financial ghosts. He tasks Claire with turning the Bianchi connection into a weapon. It is a beautiful, deadly trap built by 2 broken souls. The lesson here is profound. True revenge is never a loud, chaotic explosion of anger. Instead, it is a perfectly quiet, highly methodical starvation of the betrayer's soul until nothing is left but ash. Dominic reaches across the table, using her 6 years of survival as his ultimate weapon. He needs the ghost she became to hunt the dirty money tying Ray to Sal. He pulls a crisp piece of stationery from his pocket and writes down a lifeline. A quiet address in the South End, 4 random numbers, and a single trigger word. He describes a concrete fortress off the grid, walled with cameras. He begs her to vanish into it immediately, promising to find her when the sun goes down. Claire nods, her trembling fingers slipping the paper into her coat. You want to believe their brilliant minds will save them now, but the camera pulls back, revealing the cruel indifference of the street. The universe loves to punish those who think they can outsmart the devil. The final lesson is vital. Unchecked arrogance is always the human mind's most fatal vulnerability. The camera pushes in on Dominic's face, capturing a man standing at the edge of the abyss. He asks about his son, and Claire nods the boy is safe, hidden in the shadows then. Time slows. The ambient noise of the room completely drops out. Dominic just stops. You can see the micro-tremors in his jaw as he stares at a ghost-made flesh. He whispers, his voice thick with a monstrous grief, that he wanted to butcher Ray right there on the 34th floor. But he pulls back, promising a slow, beautiful ruin instead. Claire reaches across the table. Her pale fingers graze his knuckles, sealing a dark pact. She wants Ray broken, stripped of his very soul before he dies. It is a terrifying communion, sometimes. Shared hatred weaves a much stronger thread between shattered souls than love ever could. Let us reframe the shot, you and I. We pan out from this fragile bubble of intimacy to the cold gray street. Dominic stares at her hand resting on his in a low, genuine laugh escapes his chest, the first real sound of life leaving his body in 6 agonizing years. But tragedy never rests. Cut to the gray sedan parked across the rain-slicked asphalt, through the tinted glass. An operative in a navy cap adjusts the heavy lens of his camera. The focus ring turns, sharpening the image of the underworld king utterly exposed. Sitting with a dead woman, the shutter clicks. With a single tap, the photograph flies through the digital ether to a man named Ray. The lesson here is as brutal as a knife in the dark. When you live in a world built on blood, hiding secrets in the light of day will only get you killed. The scene cuts to a high-contrast penthouse. Ray stares at the glowing screen of his phone. We push in tight on his widening eyes as he studies the photograph. The gray hat, the familiar slope of her jaw, those haunting, sorrowful eyes. The blood drains from his face, leaving him the color of old ash. The ghost he created has come back to haunt him. The sheer terror of his collapsing empire twists instantly into rage. He barks an order. His voice cracking with desperation, grab Claire the moment she is alone, and force the child's location from her lips by 11. The dogs of war are off their leashes, miles away. Claire steps out onto the bright pavement of Charles Street, leaving just ahead of the man she loves. It is a beautiful, tragic illusion that she is safe. The past is always faster. The camera tracks Claire from a low angle as she pulls her knit cap down against the biting wind. She moves with the nervous energy of hunted prey, plotting her escape through the city grid. A subway ride, a brisk walk through the park, a disappearing act into the fog. It is a desperate plan, but fate is a cruel director. Her illusion of control dies in exactly 90 seconds. Pan to the shadowed doorway across the avenue. Tommy stands there, a coiled spring of loyalty and violence, watching her every step as she turns north. The young enforcer drops his paper and slides into the river of pedestrians, hovering just behind her. Notice the perfect, agonizing tension of this frame. A broken woman, unaware she is stalked by death, guarded by a silent shadow willing to bleed for her. True protection always happens in the dark. The frame violently shakes as the serenity shatters. A dark van peels away from the curb and slams on its brakes. The screech of tires cutting through the morning air. 2 heavy men pour from the sliding doors. In the background, Tommy is already moving. He roars her name, ordering her to run. The sheer terror in Claire's eyes is magnificent to capture. She spins, sprinting blindly into the crowd. A gunshot rips the air, tearing into the brick inches from her skull. Tommy drops low, his weapon barking twice. And the first hunter crumples to the pavement, but tragedy always demands a toll. The second shooter turns, sending a round tearing through Tommy's shoulder. The impact spins the boy around, spraying crimson across the stone yet. Fueled by absolute devotion to his father figure, he refuses to fall. Loyalty is a heavy burden to bear. Cut back to the cafe, the camera catches the exact micro-expression where Dominic's soul goes ice-cold. He moves with terrifying grace, his heavy chair crashing backward as he bursts through the doors. The chaotic screaming of the street fades to a muted hum, the sound design narrowing to nothing but his own violent heartbeat. Down the block, Claire is running out of time. She scrambles toward the slick granite steps, gasping for air, but her legs betray her. She trips, her ankle twisting violently as she crashes onto the hard stone. Her purse spills, a pathetic tragedy of scattered belongings. Before she can push herself up, the shadow falls over her. A brutal hand closes around her slender wrist. Dominic is sprinting, his face a mask of utter agony, but the cruel geometry of the street denies him. The terrible truth of this world is that sheer will alone can never bridge the gap when time runs out. Let us freeze the frame right here. You and I. Watch the way Dominic rounds the corner. There is no moral hesitation, no shaking of the gun, a single thunderous shot echoes, and the man gripping Claire's wrist drops like dead weight. She is sobbing, clawing at the concrete in absolute hysteria. Dominic does not speak. He simply reaches down and scoops her fragile body into his arms, shutting out the wailing sirens, out of the smoke. Tommy staggers forward. Blood is pouring freely between his fingers, yet the wounded boy only wants to know what his king needs next. Dominic coldly orders him to clean the mess and summon the transport. On cue, a massive black vehicle glides against the curb like a hearse. The scene is a dark, beautiful symphony of violence. Love in this brutal world is measured solely by how efficiently you can kill for it. Direct your attention to the front seat. Marcus Webb sits in the heavy shadows of the transport, an anchor of cold stone. He has spent the morning nursing black coffee and the weight of a loaded pistol. The door slides open, and Dominic thrusts Claire inside, just as the flashing police lights reflect off the windshield. In the darkness of the back seat, Claire is shivering violently, drowning in the terror that her secret life is over. Dominic speaks to her in a voice as calm as a winter lake, explaining that this chaos was necessary to force Ray into the open, but the emotional climax of the scene belongs to Marcus. He turns his head to look in the back. In a fraction of a second, the stoic armor he has worn for 6 years completely shatters. He is staring directly at a ghost. The human mind is incredibly fragile. When confronted with a miracle it spent years grieving. We linger on Marcus's face, exploring the agonizing depth of his unresolved grief. For 6 years, he was the man who packed away her belongings. He was the one who sat on the dark floorboards, pouring whiskey down Dominic's throat, just to keep him from pulling the trigger on himself now. The woman they mourned is breathing in his back seat. His jaw trembles. He stammers out the heavy truth they buried in an empty coffin for her. Claire opens her mouth to apologize, her eyes brimming with shame, but Marcus only pulls off his glasses. The battle-scared enforcer begins to weep like a child. There is no anger, only the crushing relief of a heavy burden lifted. He whispers how deeply her loss destroyed the man she loved. As the armored car descends into a subterranean fortress, we see the beautiful, bleeding heart of this dark family. True loyalty always outlives the grave. The camera pulls wide as the massive steel doors lock with a deafening thud. Welcome to the underworld. The bunker is bathed in harsh, fluorescent light, a sterile tomb of surveillance monitors and hidden weaponry. It is a monument constructed entirely out of a man's terrifying paranoia. Marcus stays below to stitch up the bleeding boy. Dominic leads Claire deeper into the silence. Watch his body language soften, shifting from predator back to lover. They sink onto a gray sofa. And very slowly, his scarred hand reaches out to touch her cheek. It is their first tender connection in thousands of agonizing days. He whispers a vow that she is finally safe, but the tragic irony hangs heavy in the room. This fortress is just another cage, perfectly designed to bind her to his darkness forever. Sometimes, the most dangerous prisons are the ones built entirely out of love. Let the lens linger on this twisted embrace. Dominic's voice drops to a low, possessive rumble, promising that she will never leave his sight again. Claire simply breaks. Her exhausted frame collapses against his chest. She doesn't cry out, she just surrenders, letting 6 years of endless running melt into the warmth of the man who represents her greatest danger. It is the darkest romance imaginable, finding peace in the arms of the monster who controls you. Meanwhile, we cut to the penthouse. Bathed in cold blue light, Ray's phone buzzes. The hit failed. His men are dead in the street, and the ghosts have survived slowly. The camera circles him as his perfect, untouchable world shatters into dust. The mighty emperor has been stripped bare. A life built entirely on deception will inevitably crumble the moment the bitter truth refuses to die. The voice on the phone goes dead, and Ray is left staring out at the sprawling, uncaring city. We hold on his profile for 5 excruciating seconds. You can practically hear the gears turning in his wicked mind as the finality of his doom sets in. He pieces the broken fragments together. Dominic was there. Dominic pulled the trigger. Dominic has his wife back. The terrifying equation balances perfectly in his head. The king knows exactly who sold him out. Ray takes a slow, shaky breath. He is a dead man walking, trapped in his own glass castle. He thought he could manipulate the devil, but the devil has simply flipped the board. The panic bleeding into his cold eyes is an absolute masterpiece of terror. The grandest tragedy of human ambition is that the higher you climb on a throne of lies, the harder the earth will strike you when you finally fall. The camera pushes in on a man cornered by his own sins, cold, Fluorescent light washes over Ray as his trembling fingers punch the combination into the steel vault. Pure, biological panic drives him now. He strips away his identity, pulling a forged Canadian passport, a dead real estate agent alongside stacks of banded physical currency, and a digital hard drive holding 12 years of Dominic's darkest secrets. He drops every trackable phone into a sink of water, taking only a single disposable device to dial Sal Bianchi. It is the ultimate betrayal. Framed in shadow, he built Dominic's empire, and now he hands the blueprints to the wolves. The bitter lesson here is simple. The architect of your fortress always knows exactly where the weakest stones are hidden. You and I must look closely at this shadowed negotiation, because this is where the human soul rots. Through the disposable receiver, the crisp, terrifying scratch of a match echoes as Sal Bianchi lights his cigar. Sal's voice is heavy with smoke and indifference. He diagnoses Ray as a dead man walking, demanding a reason to care. And right here, in the dim light of a telephone booth, Ray's humanity completely vaporizes, his breathing steadies. He offers up the location of Dominic's innocent little girl. He would sacrifice a child to buy himself another breath. The camera lingers on his dead eyes. A chilling life lesson emerges from the smoke. Fear strips away our masks, revealing whether we are men of honor or merely animals trying to survive. The ambient sound of the street fades as Ray's mind works with mechanical precision. He already holds the psychological profile of the child's guardian, calculating the exact minute the sun will rise, and the transfer will happen. Sal exhales a long breath, accepting the bloody trade. Ray crushes the plastic phone under his heel, walking away into the heavy fog without a single backward glance. The scene violently cuts to the stark, unforgiving shadows of a penthouse boardroom. Dominic stands motionless at the head of a massive mahogany table, framed by the city lights below. Beside him stand his broken enforcer and his silent proxy. It is a portrait of a fractured kingdom. The lesson is timeless. You can study the darkness forever, but you can never truly control the monsters you create. The tension in the room is suffocating, thick with the scent of leather and impending doom. Tommy paces in the background, clutching his wounded arm in a sling, begging for a bloodbath. But Dominic remains an immovable statue against the glass. His voice drops to a clinical hollow pitch. Ray emptied the vault and ran to Bianchi, guaranteeing a massacre within 7 days. Marcus stands in the shadows, delivering the grim truth. Clara and the child are marked for death. But Dominic does not blink. He turns from the window, revealing that Elena is already driving the little girl up the northern highways, far from the slaughter. The truth of survival is harsh but necessary. You only win the war by anticipating the enemy before the first shot is ever fired. We zoom in on the sheer agonizing weight of executive isolation. Dominic secretly routed his daughter to a snowblind Vermont cabin using a dead man's name. He kept Marcus Tommy, and even Claire completely in the dark. The lighting shifts, painting half of his face in shadow as he explains his freezing logic. If race men drag Claire into a basement and tear her apart, she cannot confess a location she does not know. Claire steps forward, her voice breaking, begging him just to hold her baby one last time. Dominic looks into the desperate eyes of the woman he loves, his jaw tightening. Then he says no. She closes her eyes as tears fall. The lesson here is the most painful one of all. Sometimes the absolute price of keeping someone alive is having to let them go completely. The silence of the room shatters when Marcus places a ringing phone on the desk. Claire grabs it and the screen glows, illuminating the dark room. A little girl appears, her cheeks flushed pink from the winter wind. Clutching a small blanket, Dominic freezes. The camera catches the exact moment his chest stops rising. For the very first time, this ruthless king gazes upon his own flesh and blood. He cannot speak. He barely remembers how to breathe. Yet the child leans into the lens, eyes wide and fearless, telling him she already knows who he is. She whispers that her mother keeps his picture hidden inside a wooden box in her closet. Understand a vital life lesson in this fragile moment. The deepest emotional bonds often grow in the dark, nurtured entirely by fiercely protected memories. The impenetrable armor of a mob boss finally cracks, collapsing under the weight of a child's innocent gaze. Dominic lets out a breathless, broken laugh. A single tear tracks down his face as he whispers that he is okay, simply because he can finally look at her, but in a Greek tragedy. Love is immediately punished by blood. The camera cuts away, thrusting us 48 hours into the future. Boston descends into absolute chaos. At 3 a.m, a massive fireball rips through the night sky as a Moretti warehouse detonates, turning 3 men to ash by dawn. A lone gunman walks into a Bianchi restaurant, leaving 5 bodies slumped over their morning coffee. The psychological lesson is unavoidable. Peace is merely a fragile illusion, maintained between periods of total destruction. Let's peel back the layers of this rotting city together. The morning news broadcasts a pathetic statement from the local authorities, masking the fact that they are drowning in syndicate payrolls. 3 police captains belong to Moretti, 2 belong to Bianchi, and the streets are left to bleed. But deep inside a federal building, Special Agent Sarah Chen stares at a corkboard, quietly connecting the dots before the sun even rises. Meanwhile, the camera pans across the top floor. Dominic transforms his towering headquarters into an impregnable fortress. Armed guards flood the concrete garage. The steel shutters drop with a deafening slam. The behavioral lesson is grounded in harsh reality. When the institutions designed to protect you rot away, survival is entirely in your own hands. The air inside the penthouse feels incredibly thin. Tommy paces like a wounded animal, trying to project a menacing aura to hide his shattered arm. Claire moves with nervous energy, locking eyes with Dominic before opening the heavy oak doors. Enter Harold Finch. He is 70 years old, clutching a worn leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. For 3 decades, this journalist dissected the Moretti family from afar, mapping their bloodlines and their sins now. He steps into the belly of the beast. Dominic steps out of the shadows, extends his hand, and offers a quiet nod of respect. It is a stunning visual contrast. The lesson here is profound. The adversary who spent their entire life studying your flaws often becomes the only person equipped to keep you alive in the end. We are about to witness the absolute destruction of a man's reality. Harold sits at the grand table, his trembling fingers sliding a faded photograph from 1995 into the pool of overhead light. It is the Falcone family. He recounts the bloody night. Dominic's father slaughtered them over a drug dispute, missing only the youngest boy. The camera zooms in on the old photograph. The bone structure, the piercing eyes, they align flawlessly with Dominic's right-hand man. Despite the plastic surgery in Montreal, the biometric truth screams from the paper. Raymond is the surviving Falcone boy. The lesson here strikes like a physical blow to the chest. You can build the thickest walls in the world, but they mean nothing if you invite your executioner to sit down at your own table. Absolute silence swallows the room. Dominic stares at the photograph, his body locking into rigid stillness as the foundation of his life crumbles beneath him. A hollow whisper escapes his lips. The monster sat at his table for 12 years. He married Dominic's beloved sister, Sophia. He held her, he gave her a child. The sheer malignancy of Raymond's patience is terrifying to behold. Dominic forces down the urge to scream. He picks up the phone and calls Sophia, his voice unnervingly calm. He gives her 90 seconds to pack her child and vanish, demanding the blind trust they forged as abused children. The lesson here is devastating, yet undeniable. The most catastrophic betrayals rarely come from your sworn enemies, but from the parasites sleeping soundly in your own home. The trauma bond of their childhood takes over, and Sophia immediately drops the phone, grabbing her baby to flee into the dark. Back in the boardroom, Harold opens his ledger. The pages reveal $4 million quietly routed through Zurich, funding Raymond's long game. Harold adjusts his glasses, suggesting this proof is enough for the ruling families to demand Raymond's head. But Dominic looks out at the blinking city lights with cold, dead eyes. Raymond is already hiding behind Salbianchi's army. They cannot just ask for him, they have to drag him out into the street. Claire questions how they will do it, bringing us to a bitter truth. The lesson remains. All the evidence in the world is completely useless if the poison you need to extract is locked safely inside a rival fortress. Step into the frame with me, and let us examine the anatomy of a tragedy unfolding in real time. Dominic lays out the bleak mathematics of the criminal mind. Salvatore will never shelter Raymond without a steep return. Raymond is starving, desperate to assassinate Dominic personally. They need bait, meaning they need Claire, but watch her posture, spine straight, jaw set. After 6 years of suffocating dread, she refuses the role of the trembling victim. She demands to stand in the fire, in the corner. Marcus quietly sketches an ambush while the scent of smoke still lingers. A compromised driver is fed a poisoned whisper. The truth of human nature is beautifully grim. The monster in the room is never the one screaming. It is always the quiet shadow, carefully moving the pieces. The camera shifts to a trembling subordinate named Delaney. Marcus noticed the subtle tells months ago. Delaney was taking Bianchi money. Instead of letting blood spill, Marcus turns the traitor into a hollow instrument. He scripts a flawless deception. letting him stumble upon a fabricated secret. The lie is intoxicating. Claire is supposedly meeting a prosecutor at a Cambridge restaurant called Rialto on Friday. The hook is a non-existent affidavit, promising to bury Raymond forever. Consumed by greed, Delaney races to transmit the lie to his masters. Meanwhile, the truth remains locked behind the steel of their 20th floor sanctuary. Here is a brutal law of survival. The deadliest weapon you can forge is the comforting illusion that your enemy is the smartest person in the room. Notice the immaculate geometry of this trap. The owner of Rialto owes his life to Dominic's family. A sudden panic over tainted fish is manufactured, and the dining room goes dark by 7. High above the cobblestones, Special Agent Sarah Chen melts into the shadows of an adjacent garage, her rifle a cold extension of her breath. Claire is erased from the board. In her place sits an FBI decoy, draped in the haunting familiarity of Claire's gray wool cap. Friday bleeds into night. Dominic sits motionless, bathed in the pale glow of 8 surveillance monitors. The lesson is written in the shadows. True victory is never found by charging blindly into a chaotic street. You win by painstakingly building the cage before the wolf even realizes he is hungry. The tension in the room is suffocating. Claire presses her hand against Dominic's neck, grounding his fraying sanity. Tommy stands by the door, a silent sentinel. At 8:15, a black sedan slides into the frame like a hearse. Raymond steps onto the pavement. Dominic watches the screen with the morbid fascination of a man witnessing a fatal wreck. Raymond's paranoia demands he alone must deliver the killing blow. He forces the restaurant door, flanked by 3 enforcers. The space is a tomb. The lighting choked down to a sickly dimness. Across the room, the gray cap waits in the absolute silence. It reveals a tragic flaw in the human condition, when sheer obsession infects the mind. A man will march past 100 screaming sirens straight into his own open grave. Stay with me here, because this is where the facade shatters. Raymond glides through the empty tables with the grace of a starving wolf. He raises his weapon, but the illusion breaks. The shoulders are wrong. It is not Claire. Before the realization registers, the ceiling splinters into a shower of plaster. Federal agents cascade from the heights. Look at Raymond's eyes. There is no shock. Only the reptilian coldness of a sociopath cornered. He does not surrender. Instead, he barks a feral command in Italian, fires directly over his own men. His soldiers panic, returning wildfire, wounding 2 agents in the chaos. The moral of this bloody scene is absolute. A cornered narcissist will gladly drown his entire world just to steal one more breath of freedom for himself. As the room descends into a symphony of gunfire, Raymond simply evaporates. The camera tracks his sprint down a service corridor. He rips through the pantry, plunging into the damp cellar. Bursting out of a street-level door, he folds himself into a waiting vehicle. Before the perimeter locks down, the phantom is gone. Back inside, the cost is staggering. 3 syndicate soldiers bleed into the rugs. Alongside 2 agents, the steel jaws snap shut, but the beast escaped. Here is the devastating irony of Dominic's grand design. He thought he was playing chess in Cambridge, but Salvatore analyzed the exact same board to execute a darker game. It teaches us a painful truth. All the brilliance in the world turns to ash when you underestimate the absolute destruction of a sociopath. The lens pulls back to reveal the grim architecture of Salvatore's mind. He operates in a void of absolute cruelty, while Dominic wove a web. Salvatore looked past the illusion. He knew if the husband created a spectacle, the wife was hidden close to home. He ignores the hotels, targeting a quiet brownstone in the South End. Behind those walls sits Marcus, a 62-year-old man far removed from active violence. When the wolves arrive, they do not knock. They simply pack the heavy steel door with explosives and blow it to dust. It captures a terrifying reality woven into the fabric of a violent life. Sometimes the horrific consequences of your past simply arrive to collect their blood debt, and the universe does not care if you are ready to pay. The violence is horrifying. Unfolding in 7 suffocating seconds, 4 shadows pour through the shattered frame. Marcus flips the heavy table, his revolver barking twice in the smoke. Claire drops fingers wrapping around a hidden pistol. She fires upward, catching the lead attacker beneath the jaw. But the second shadow pivots, driving a round straight into Marcus's abdomen. The old man crumbles, yet his fading motor skills keep weakly squeezing the trigger. Rough hands tape Claire's mouth, physically dragging her into the freezing night. A lingering attacker glances at the blood and assumes Marcus is a corpse. It is a fatal miscalculation. Leaving a bleeding survivor behind is absolute madness. A victim with nothing left to lose is the most catastrophic force on Earth. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Picture Marcus lying on the splintered hardwood, his life leaking away with one trembling finger. He drags his phone across the floor. He manages one devastating whisper before the darkness takes him. Miles away, sealed inside his impregnable fortress, Dominic hears that wet, gasping breath. The microphone slips from his rigid fingers, clattering against the desk. In a fraction of a second, the mythical armor of the untouchable Winter King turns to dust. He is no longer a mastermind. He is just a terrified human being experiencing the violent destruction of his emotional anchor. Here is the absolute truth of our existence. You can build the thickest walls imaginable around your mind, but true vulnerability will always find the microscopic fracture to break you completely open. For one suffocating second, the crime lord ceases to exist. He is merely 37-year-old Nico, staring blindly at static monitors, paralyzed by the sensation of burying his spouse for a second time. The neurological shock is profound, but watch his eyes. A brutal defense mechanism slams down. The blinding grief freezes into crystalline detachment. His voice is a flat, dead rasp as he calls Tommy to the desk. Dominic issues a chilling mandate. Every breathing soul in his syndicate must report to the garage by 1 a.m. They are targeting the waterfront. While Tommy initiates the protocol, Dominic coldly dials Vermont. It is a bleak lesson in survival. Grief is a paralyzing luxury reserved for those who have already lost everything. When loved ones remain in jeopardy, focused action is the only absolute cure. The camera pushes in on Dominic's face. Listen to his voice as he commands Elena to take the child to a tertiary location. Elena's chest heaves as her panic spikes, yet she swallows the terror. She complies flawlessly, intentionally refusing to know their final coordinates. It is a chilling display of trauma bonding and absolute trust. Dominic acknowledges her resilience. For one solitary, agonizing heartbeat, he squeezes his eyes shut against the pain. Then he kills the line. No tears fall. He compartmentalizes the agony to systematically dismantle his enemies. 20 minutes later, the steel door hisses open, and Special Agent Sarah Chen breaches his sanctuary alone, projecting absolute authority. We learn a grim truth about human suffering. The most devastating grief does not thrash or scream. It simply goes to work. Walk with me through this final negotiation. The power dynamic shifts the moment Agent Chen crosses into hostile territory unescorted. She establishes dominance by referencing his hospitalized attorney, then presents an ultimatum, in exchange for his wife's extraction. Dominic must submit to federal custody and surrender Salvatore Bianchi. He must forfeit his syndicate, his wealth, his kingdom. Dominic registers zero physiological distress. His eyes never leave the surveillance feeds. He simply agrees. He will willingly incinerate his own empire to preserve his primary attachment. It is an agonizing human tragedy. You only comprehend the true value of your existence when you are forced to watch it burn. Meanwhile, inside a freezing storage facility, Claire finally regains consciousness. Let us step into this frame together. You and I picture the harsh, unforgiving glare of a single fluorescent bulb swinging above a rusted metal chair. Claire is strapped to the cold steel, a thin line of blood trailing from her hairline. The camera pushes in on her eyes. There is no panic. Only the cold calculation of a survivor mapping the angles of her own slaughter. The heavy iron door grinds open, and the architect of her agony steps into the light, Salvatore Bianchi. His suit is immaculate, his smile a terrifying void of human warmth. He has nursed this hatred for 6 agonizing years. We all learn this tragic lesson eventually. Resentment is a patient, starving parasite. It waits in the absolute pitch black, breathing softly, just waiting for the day you finally stumble. The psychological vivisection begins. Bianchi leans in close, his voice a velvet blade, demanding the exact location of the child. Watch the subtle, defiant set of Claire's jaw. She looks right through him, her voice perfectly level as she claims absolute ignorance. She has locked that secret away in a mental vault he will never breach. Bianchi throws his head back and laughs, genuinely amused by her desperate, beautiful defiance. But the air grows thick, suffocating, as Raymond Falcone steps from the shadows. Claire turns slowly, after all these years. The glass barrier is gone. They are breathing the same bitter air. It is the cruelest tragedy of the human condition. The ghosts of your unresolved trauma will relentlessly hunt you across the earth, until they finally demand an audience. Just look at the tectonic shift in power here. For 30 years, nobody has dared whisper Raymond's birth name to his face. But Claire leans forward and systematically strips away his armor. She recites his hidden financial ruin, his buried vital records, the tragic, forgotten lineage of his mother. 6 years of obsessive quiet study, weaponized in seconds. The camera catches the exact tremor in Raymond's hands as his ego shatters. He draws his weapon, jamming the cold steel against her forehead. But Salvatore calmly reaches out, his manicured fingers wrapping around Raymond's shaking wrist. The child must be found first. It is the darkest truth of the vindictive soul. Those capable of the most profound cruelty never rush the final blow. They savor every drop of your despair. It is 2 a.m, and a freezing maritime wind howls through the rusted bones of the industrial shipyard. The staging area is a theater of shadows. 30 men form a jagged perimeter in the fog. Mob enforcers standing shoulder to shoulder with federal agents. A miraculous, tragic alliance born of pure desperation. Dominic is a phantom in the dark, clad in heavy tactical armor, but the lens finds Tommy Russo. His left arm hangs practically useless, shattered and bleeding, yet his right hand grips his weapon with a skeletal white-knuckle intensity. He refuses to abandon the man who saved him. Let me tell you what authentic loyalty looks like. It is not born of convenience. It is the beautiful, reckless compulsion to bleed out beside someone when your own strength is gone. Stay with me here, because what we are about to witness is a masterclass in orchestrated chaos. Agent Chen holds the line outside, surrendering total control to Dominic's ghost-like direction. The overture begins with a deafening auditory diversion to the east, while a second team brutally severs the massive power grid. Above it all, Dominic and Tommy crouch on the glass skylight, the frozen wind whipping at their coats. 3 years ago, Dominic stared at a faded blueprint of this warehouse, and the architecture is burned into his tragic memory. At 2:16, a heavy transport truck shatters the front gates. 1 minute later, the world goes entirely pitch black. This is the simple rule of the abyss. When the darkness falls, only the man who mapped the shadows will survive. When the light vanishes, the sophisticated mask of civilization drops away instantly. For 1 agonizing second, there is only the silence of the grave, and then absolute pandemonium. Men scream into the void, heavy boots tear across the concrete, and a chaotic symphony of blind gunfire lights up the dark like violent strobe flashes. But watch Claire. She is a portrait of pure, kinetic grace. Tapping into a mental rehearsal practiced 1,000 times, she fractures the aged wood of the chair and slips her bindings. She rolls into the deep cover of the steel shipping crates, seizing her own destiny. High above, Salvatore Bianchi glides through the dark, unbothered, as calm as a ghost haunting its own murder scene. The tragic lesson is clear. Panic is biology, but action is a choice. Salvatore hauls Raymond up the rusted iron ladder by his collar, operating on pure, cold instinct. Seconds later, a rope drops from the shattered skylight. Dominic descends into the pitch black like an avenging angel. His boots hit the floor, and his hands desperately search the dark, only to find the empty, splintered chair. The sheer physical agony of losing his entire world stops his breathing. Then her soft voice cuts through the smoke. You and I know how deeply this hits him. He slices away her remaining ropes with a trembling hand, begging her to run for the federal barricade. He wants to walk into hell alone. But she firmly grips his arm, because tragic devotion is never just about shielding the one you love. It means stepping into the firing line, together side by side. Look at the heavy, unspoken poetry of this second. Dominic stares into the absolute blackness, measuring the terrible weight of what comes next. Without a word, he presses a heavy pistol and a folded blade into her shaking palms. She takes them, her fingers wrapping around the cold steel with terrifying acceptance. They move as one, charging up the vibrating iron stairwell into the mouth of the beast. Above them, Salvatore ducks behind a massive shipping container, a thin line of blood dripping from a glancing blow. The old king fires blindly into the abyss. Dominic does not even blink. He pulls his trigger twice. The first bullet tears through Salvatore's ear. The second pulverizes the thick muscle of his shoulder. Hesitation is the mother of the grave, and Dominic refuses to die. The old sociopath collapses in a heap of tailored wool and shattered bone, utterly removed from the board. But the tragic irony of trauma is that it never sleeps. From the blind spot, Raymond lunges out and violently presses the heated barrel of his gun into the soft flesh of Claire's jawline. Do not move, he whispers. Dominic freezes. His weapon clatters onto the metal grating, his hands raised in total surrender. Yet Raymond hesitates. He is drowning in a lifetime of miserable inferiority. Starving for an audience, he spits out his bitter monologue, screaming about Dominic's beautiful family, while he rotted in the gutter for 30 years. The megalomaniac is always the architect of his own ruin. The second you pause to seek validation from your enemy, You have already lost the war. The psychological rot inside Raymond is a terrifying thing to witness. His eyes are wide, glassy with madness, as he gleefully confesses to butchering Dominic's first wife. He paints a gruesome picture of exactly how he will slaughter their child next, framing his depravity as some kind of cosmic poetry. But under the shadow of his arm, Claire makes her move, a microscopic shift of her wrist. A quiet click of steel. Driven by the sheer animal will to live, she drives the blade deep into the ruined meat of Raymond's thigh. He shrieks, his finger jerking the trigger. The bullet tears through the air, violently grazing the delicate shell of her ear. The ancient truth of the hunted is written in blood right here. Drag out the torture long enough, and the prey will become the predator. Let us pause for a moment, because this is the emotional climax we have been building toward. Dominic slams Raymond onto the blood-slicked metal grate, his knee planted firmly on his chest. His finger wraps tight around the trigger. 2 decades of suffocating grief and raw, unfiltered rage are begging him to blow this man into nothingness. The cinematic tension is unbearable. But then Claire steps into the frame. Her face is pale, blood pooling on her collar, but her voice is an iron anchor. She whispers for him to put it down. For the first time in 20 years, Dominic's hand trembles. He looks at the monster, and he chooses to step back. True power is not the roar of a gunshot, it is the agonizing restraint of mercy. To truly reclaim your soul, you must learn to walk away from vengeance. Claire sentences this broken man to a living hell. She knows that for a raging narcissist. Rotting in a concrete box while his own flesh and blood realizes he is a monster is a torture far worse than the grave. It is the total, absolute annihilation of his ego. Dominic stares into Raymond's panicked eyes, finally understanding her brilliant cruelty. He lifts his heavy pistol and brings the steel grip crashing down against Raymond's temple. He whispers a quiet dedication to Claire and Sophia as the man goes limp. In that single sickening crunch, an empire of terror shatters. By 3 a.m, the federal sirens are wailing. Salvatore Bianchi is wheeled out on a gurney, chained like an animal. You and I know the tragic irony. Every empire built on chains will eventually cage its own kings. You and I must now pan the camera across the grim reality of this aftermath together. Raymond Falcone, a man who believed himself an untouchable god, is marched into the glare of red sirens. His wrists are bound in plastic, dried blood flaking from his cheek as Agent Chen coldly reads his rights. But the butcher's bill is devastating. 11 syndicate men are dead. 3 of Dominic's enforcers bled out on the cold concrete. Most tragically, a 31-year-old agent with 2 small children caught a stray bullet. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb survives a grueling 7-hour surgery. It is a cinematic tragedy, painted in blood and shadow. The simple truth we must all eventually accept is that our worst, most violent actions almost never hurt only the people we originally aimed at. The ward lights flicker as the surgeon reveals the agonizing margin to Tommy. A mere 2 centimeters separated a medical recovery from a cold morgue slab. It is terrifying how a tiny fraction of an inch dictates the boundary between tragedy and survival. Outside, Claire and Dominic sit in the heavy shadows of an idling ambulance. Claire winces, bearing a dark contusion on her skull. Dominic leans in, his hands trembling as he meticulously cleans the dried blood from her face. He has been starved of her touch for 6 torturous years. She whispers into the dark, asking if the nightmare is finally over. He meets her eyes, his expression heavy, and warns that the trials are just beginning. Life teaches us that surviving physical trauma is merely the first step toward true healing. Watch closely as Dominic details his pact with the government. The most terrifying predator in Boston is voluntarily tearing down his empire. He keeps the legitimate shipping lines, cutting away the tumor of his illicit income. He locks eyes with Claire, his voice thick with emotion, promising he is done with the blood-soaked pursuit of dominance. He chooses to be a husband and a father. When she searches his face for doubt, we witness a profound breakthrough. He gently lifts her chin. 6 years ago, the shadows dictated his path, but today he reclaims his soul by dawn. The harbor is bathed in a warm, brassy light as they pull away in a quiet sedan. The vital lesson here is beautiful. No matter your dark history, you always retain the absolute power to choose a different tomorrow. The sedan hums steadily, driving north for 4 hours as Dominic finally sheds his heavy psychological armor. He confesses to 6 years of blind fidelity. The camera lingers on his exhausted face as he describes spending every Saturday morning speaking to an empty headstone. He used his violent empire as a manic defense mechanism to outrun the crushing reality of his grief. Every morning, He would rotate his wedding band 3 times, an obsessive grounding technique, born in the sunlight of their honeymoon. For 2,000 days, he locked himself in a dark prison of unwavering loyalty. It is a haunting image of human attachment. The simple truth we find here is that sometimes we hold on to our deepest pain, simply because it is the only thing left of the people we loved. Let us look at the immense psychological toll of this isolation together. In the quiet car, Claire reveals the clinical reality of her trauma. When her child was born, the shadows, it was Elena who anchored her through the panic, not Dominic. For years, Claire constructed a delusion, framing the absent father as a deceased savior. Yet the emotional conditioning is painfully evident every night. She read the little girl a book on constellations, hardwiring the shape of Orion into her mind as a subconscious coping mechanism. By noon, their tires crunch over a remote gravel drive in the Vermont woods. The human mind is a tragic, beautiful thing. It will always build a desperate bridge back to its deepest attachments, regardless of the terrible pain they cause. The camera frames an isolated cabin, smoke venting into the freezing air. Elena emerges, holding Claire in a desperate embrace to release years of terror. She offers Dominic a slow, heavy nod. We are witnessing the collapse of a 6-year defensive barrier. The burden of hatred is finally exhausted. Suddenly, a small figure occupies the doorway. The child stands barefoot on the frozen grass. Her piercing gaze locks onto Dominic's right hand before scanning his terrified eyes. She asks her weeping mother if this man is truly her father. Claire, overwhelmed by raw emotion, chokes out a confirmation. But notice the heartbreaking realism in this cinematic frame. The child does not rush forward. We quickly learn that real trust always requires consistent proof, not just shared genetics. The child processes the adult with the detachment of an analyst. She tilts her head, demanding to know if he retains the motor function of an embrace. Explaining her mother warned his absence might have degraded this skill. The psychological impact on the former Kingpin is catastrophic. Stripping away his violent defenses in a microsecond, he collapses to one knee on the frozen earth. He exhibits a profound emotional rupture, his shoulders shaking as tears fall uninhibited. He chokes out a plea, insisting his muscle memory for holding her never degraded. Slowly, the child steps forward and initiates contact. The broken family stands frozen in the morning light. Severe trauma will always break us apart, but genuine vulnerability is the only mechanism that pieces us back together. Let us shift our lens forward 4 months to the heavy marble of a Boston courtroom. The consequences are absolute. The state presents a brutal 71-page teardown of Raymond Falcone, detailing organized violence and severe pathology, demanding lifelong containment without parole. Beside him, Bianchi faces 40 years of isolation. By the 3rd day, Dominic occupies the witness box. He operates under an immunity agreement, hammered out over 19 agonizing hours of psychological warfare in a windowless room. The apex predator is methodically dismantling his own bloody hierarchy. We learn a dark truth in this room. Loyalty is a myth among wolves, and betrayal is simply a visceral survival reflex when the iron cell door threatens to close forever. He coldly liquidates his underworld network for legal absolution. For 6 relentless hours, he absorbs rapid-fire interrogation, his nervous system suppressed. His vocal pitch remains a dead flatline. On the 5th day, the atmosphere shifts as Claire takes the stand. Stripped of all hypervigilance, wearing an unremarkable blue dress, she projects overwhelming psychological dominance. She verbally deconstructs a 6-year trauma cycle, from the initial shock in a parking lot to the visceral violence of the waterfront. Her cognitive recall is so rapid the court reporter must halt the proceedings. The gallery enters a collective freeze response. We are reminded that true power does not require a weapon. It merely requires a survivor willing to speak the absolute, unfiltered truth. Falcone sits restrained at the defense table, unable to break eye contact when her testimony concludes. Claire focuses entirely on the architect of her suffering. Her approach is a masterful deployment of psychological warfare. She denies him the hatred a narcissist craves for validation. Instead, she offers clinical pity for his 5-year-old son, doomed to abandonment. She states he prioritized his need for dominance over his own child's development. That realization bypasses every mental defense he possesses. The sociopathic facade shatters instantly. The untouchable Kingpin drops his heavy head, hollowed out by profound cognitive dissonance. We learn that our most devastating defeats come not from hatred, but from realizing exactly what our blind pride has destroyed. Stick with me, because you and I must examine this behavioral breakdown. The predator begins to hyperventilate. weeping with the total loss of ego control. The jury finalizes his lifelong containment, while Bianchi absorbs a 42-year isolation mandate. But the true resolution occurs in the cold marble corridor. Sophia is standing there with her young son. She severed her trauma bond the moment Dominic confessed the extent of his deception. She confronts Claire, her voice trembling as she offers a profound apology for the collateral damage caused by their shared captor. Claire kneels to validate the innocent child, then rises to embrace the other woman. We see clearly that true liberation often comes when victims of severe abuse finally recognize their own surviving spirit in one another. We move forward through the timeline to observe the cognitive restructuring of these souls. Claire holds Sophia, whispering that the boy is untainted by their generational violence. Surprisingly, Dominic suppresses his dark tendencies and honors his government agreement. He transforms his criminal infrastructure into a legitimate shipping enterprise. 140 operatives are successfully reconditioned for standard civilian employment. A former enforcer now functions as the chief operating officer, regulated by corporate protocol. Even their attorney narrows his practice to maintain a strict legal boundary. It is a hard-fought ending to a tragic cinematic tale. Behavioral modification is always achievable. We are never genetically bound to the worst decisions of our past. Let the camera linger on the quiet, unforgiving aftermath. Harold Finch, a man who analyzes broken minds, wrote a book on the tragedy and offered Claire a cut of the profits. She gave every cent to a trust for the children of the incarcerated, trying to heal her own invisible wounds. Across town, Agent Chen accepted federal medals, seeking comfort in cold validation. But the real story is frozen in a single newspaper clipping. They stand on the granite courthouse steps, whipped by a bitter March wind. The world called it a triumph, cheering for the little girl who dismantled a criminal empire, but zoom in on their faces. Look at the slight furrow of their brows, the hollow exhaustion in their tired eyes. There is no victory here. Survival is rarely a parade. It simply means you are the last one left breathing, shivering in the ruins of the life you used to know. As the screen fades to black, a chilling final truth remains. You and I must understand that burying our pain is a temporary illusion. The ghosts of trauma always claw their way back, often awakened when an innocent child speaks the very words adults are too cowardly to face. This is the ultimate lesson of the human heart. True power is never found in violent dominance. Real strength is the agonizing sacrifice of a mother enduring 6 years of terror to keep her baby safe. It is a ruthless kingpin tearing down his own dark legacy, trading an empire for one last quiet breakfast with his little girl, and sometimes the deepest bravery belongs to a tiny child clutching a threadbare toy, staring down the lies of the world, and refusing to close her eyes. In the end, facing our own dark truth is the only way to ever truly heal.
Raymond Falcone's entire life is built around revenge. After losing his family, he spends decades creating a false identity, changing his face, earning trust, and entering Dominic Moretti's inner circle. His patience is frightening. He does not simply want to hurt Dominic. He wants to erase the Moretti bloodline completely. This is one of the darkest lessons in the story. Revenge can become a prison. Raymond believes he is honoring his dead family, but in reality he sacrifices his entire life to hatred. He marries into the Moretti family, has a son, gains power, and still remains trapped by the past. He cannot enjoy love, fatherhood, or a future, because everything is filtered through vengeance. The most tragic part is that Raymond becomes the very thing he hates. He lost his family to violence, yet he is willing to destroy another family's child. He suffered from bloodline revenge, then chooses to continue the same cycle. This is how violence travels across generations. One wound becomes another wound, and innocent people are forced to pay for crimes they did not commit. Claire's words in court reveal the true punishment. Raymond loses not only his freedom, but also his son's future with him. He chose revenge over fatherhood. He allowed hatred to become more important than the child who needed him. For viewers, the lesson is deeply important. Pain is real. Injustice is real. Anger can be understandable. But when revenge becomes the center of life, it does not bring back what was lost. It only creates more loss. The story teaches that justice and revenge are not the same. Justice seeks truth and accountability. Revenge seeks endless destruction. Raymond's life proves that revenge may feel like purpose, but it eventually consumes the person who carries it.